it is time for Michael to take his turn.
So, professional amateurs in fighting games. I think there's this thought that running amateur tournaments helps the scene, helps nurture the scene, and I'm not sure I really agree with that. Recently, Sony and Red Bull have been running amateur level events in Singapore at Southeast Asia Major, and the Red Bull Proving Grounds, which James was commenting on recently. And it's funny to me because, like, in the Proving Ground Grand Finals, which is yesterday, the Grand Finals featured an Evo champ and a longtime world traveling veteran. Not to mention, amateur players pretty much make up the majority of the FGC by a lot. I don't know, 90% maybe or more. Not too many people can play fighting games for a living full time. So I know TOs are worrying about tournament attendance drop off. I like the idea of amateur tournaments, but ultimately I'm not sure they serve as a way to get those unsponsored players or unsponsored veterans to get into more tournaments, to make more money or qualify for larger events. It kind of goes against the spirit of what these events are intended for. I don't know. Is it just me, or is it just a way for higher level players to kind of feed off of lower level players in these events?
I mean, how do they determine, once again, like, who's allowed to compete? Is it just...
It's kind of up to the tournament. Like, as an example, at SEAM, their amateur tournament was you have to be under the age of 30 and not sponsored. Whereas I believe and James might be able to know this more, but the Red Bull Proving Grounds tournaments were basically you couldn't have a certain amount of Capcom Pro Tour points because the end result of those tournaments sent you to qualifiers for the Capcom Pro Tour.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hardest part, right? Is determining what is the criteria for being an amateur and not. I like the idea because a lot of people that I've talked to who are new to fighting games, they're scared to enter tournaments because they're just like, I just don't want to get beat up by these really great players. Oh, I can't win, kind of thing. But we want to encourage people to play. So I like the idea of an amateur tournament. I'm just not sure exactly what the best way to do that. So I think might have finished second or top 3 or somewhere in SEAM was a Leslie Chong, and he's been an amazing Street Fighter 4 player for a very long time. So when I saw him in that list as an amateur, I was like, really? So, and then of course Zyzy, was super good. He did well there. Then he started flying out to a bunch of events and did really well. Yeah, that's just the hard part for me is finding out what the right criteria is.
So in Melee, I'm not 100% sure how they work, but there's what's called Arcadians, and they're basically like tournaments where pros are not allowed to play. Okay. And I think their definition of pro is you're power ranked regionally. So like if anyone is ranked power ranked, in the region or higher, they can't compete in the tournament, and then everyone else can play. And I've heard some arguments back and forth about whether or not they're a good idea at all or how it works, but I think like you would have to have like the TO kind of decide, I guess, versus like I think if you start saying like, oh, you can't have Capcom Pro Tour points, you get weird situations where like, oh, this guy just hasn't competed yet or something, and he just showed up here and ran people over. Right. So I think it also depends on the purpose. Where like the Arcadians for Melee are very much about just like letting people play at a lower level, and then sometimes even good players go to them and just teach people and just give them tips and stuff. So I think something like that.
I think this is something that's going to have to change on a cultural level as well, because I mean the idea of a guy who's been good for a long time and is just now starting to get into a new game, going to one of these amateur tournaments, it feels kind of gross. But like on one hand, it's like, oh no, he's just getting into the game. But on the other hand, it's like you have to, as a community, say like, oh no, this isn't cool. Like this is something that. I don't mean that in a way that it's like you need to call people out and be like, get out, what's wrong with you? But I mean like more like, oh no, we have to get to, the FGC needs to get to the point where they're saying we need to foster new talent.
Well, the interesting thing to me, the reason why for Street Fighter it's kind of weird, like if Capcom did it and they based it off of their Capcom Pro Tour just for Street Fighter V, it would kind of make sense. And Smash kind of is the same way, like they have the power rankings and everything like that, which is pretty much a scene-wide accepted concept. The hardest thing about Street Fighter and some of the other games like Mortal Kombat and such, there's no overarching governing body.
Yeah, sure.
So there's no one who can really say you're an amateur, you're not. It just depends on what the people feel. I'm okay with that. I'm not big into governing bodies.
It's almost as if there should be a developer who already has a system of points that brings people to large tournaments.
Just like in terms of like the Red Bull one, like if they want to like promote scene growth, are they putting like big money behind these tournaments? Like, is it like something where it's like, oh, I kind of want to just win this. I don't care about like people getting good, because it kind of runs counter to each other. Where it's like I want people to show up and have fun and get better, and then like there's a big prize pool. Like those two seem backwards to me. If there was even a big prize pool.
That's part of an issue too. It's like the bigger the prize pool, the more people are going to show up just to win.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Red Bull did well in bringing out players from different regions with the Proving Grounds, different players from different regions to kind of showcase them. I think we got to see a lot of players that we wouldn't otherwise normally see at major events because, you know, frankly, they're probably not making top 16s or top 8s. But this idea like these professional amateurs essentially can show up and, you know, fill these spots or you know, beat these other players that are trying to find their way in the game. You know, look, that's what fighting games is. That's what the tournaments are. I don't have an issue with that necessarily, but they can also do that in, you know, any other event as well. And so if you're going to designate amateurs or amateur tournaments, I feel like there's got to be a system that you kind of put in place. Maybe like you said, with the rankings and Melee, regional rankings to kind of, I don't know, you know, curb some of those issues.
Yeah, I feel bad just having like a ban list basically with what the rankings become. But you get props at least.